Hi, and welcome back to Geology. This is Miss Sparks. Today we are going to continue our conversation about our different eras and periods that are broken down into our geologic time scale. So previously we talked about the geologic time scale as being a written record of what scientists have been able to develop about the evolution of the Earth and how it's changed over the beginning of time till present day. And so we went into talking about our different eons, which there are 4 of them, and then we broke it down into eras and periods. And so right now we're going to go through our different eras and then break it down even further into some periods, just so that you have some general insight. And that's what we're going to be working on this week, is just our understanding of, let me pull it up for us, our understanding of this periods that are happening. How has life changed from the Ordovician to the Silurian to the Devonian to the Mississippian? What has changed there in our different eras too? Remember, we talked about the idea that Paleozoic is like prehistoric, like really first life to appear on Earth. Then we get into our Mesozoic, and then finally our Cenozoic. And so we talked about the idea that Precambrian just means before life. That is somewhat the time of invertebrates, so things that probably didn't fossilize very well. The most common fossil is our stromatolites, which are really important when we talk about the geologic change of the Earth, because our stromatolites are the first ones to kind of start the process of photosynthesis. So they really helped develop the atmosphere that we have today. And so one of the most ancient life forms that we can find, and actually a very sustainable life form, because they can still be found here today on Earth. So a very simple life form. And so once again, that is Precambrian stromatolites. More than likely, there were some other soft shell or soft body organisms that have formed. We just don't have a great record of them because they don't fossilize all that easily. So let's kind of get into our Paleozoic era. So remember, I talked about that's kind of our oldest era: Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic. Paleozoic era is when Pangaea was present. And so that idea is that, once again, Pangaea was like our supercontinent that had all of our land masses kind of smushed together. And with the process of plate tectonics, it started to break apart. So the oceans were placed differently. Clearly, the geography of our continents were placed differently. And so it was able to allow us to find different organisms in different places, to say, like, okay, this connection has to be similar because these two geographic locations are not close, but yet I'm still finding a certain type of fossil. So something has to give there. So what was that? Is the idea that more than likely they were probably just closer together. The Paleozoic era is the era where finally we're starting to see multi-celled life start to flourish. So more complex organisms. This is the era of, here once again, is our trilobites. I like to call them the roly-poly of the bottom of the ocean floor. Very popular, or we can find them here in our area. Some of them are really small, and then the museum center has one of these guys that's about the size of your lab table. So pretty big at some point. They were very successful in getting large. There is an abundance of fossil records in our Paleozoic, because once again, these organisms started to become more developed. They started to form exoskeletons and other types of hard, solid body parts that were easily fossilized. And then we divide the Paleozoic into 7 different periods. And so the Paleozoic is broken down into, I'm going to go from the oldest to the youngest here: Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian. The Carboniferous, I like to break it down into the Mississippian and Pennsylvania. Guess where you can find those rocks? And the Permian. And so Kentucky does go through the process where you can see most of these. Once again, we are in northern Kentucky, mostly dominated by our Ore Division, which is right here. But we can also find other areas of other types of areas of the Paleozoic too. We've got the Silurian kind of on this outskirt right here. The Devonian is on the even further outskirts. And then finally we have a lot of the Mississippian. If you can kind of see the progression here, we can see that dip. This is where a glacier came down and pretty much bulldozed anything else that was on top of the Permian and everything. It literally wiped it all out. So we do have small exposed areas, especially up in northern Kentucky with Big Bone of the Cenozoic era, but pretty much all of the Mesozoic era was completely wiped out. I'm going to come back to the geology of Kentucky. So the Paleozoic era is kind of like, once again, multi-creatures, lots of life in the ocean, starting to see some life on land, and then a huge extinction happens. Something happens, causes the oceans to change in their salinity, to change in temperature, and causes a major extinction. That allowed for some of the creatures that lived on land to become more dominant. Enter the Mesozoic era, the age of reptiles. And so the Earth's features changed dramatically during this period, and for whatever reason, plate tectonics went on a steroid mode and went super crazy and started to break up Pangea at a very fast rate. Scientists don't understand why. It has something to do with our asthenosphere, but it caused a lot more volcanic eruptions, which then caused plate tectonics just to kind of be moving at a different pace. The continents, a lot of them were covered with shallow seas, meaning that the glaciers were not as large as they are today, which allowed more water to kind of cover up a lot of the continental features. So we saw more shallow seas, marshes that covered much more inland than we do today. Now, once again, just think Kentucky is an area where we find ocean level type critters. So at this point, still kind of in that zone too. There are three zones, or three periods, I should say, of the Mesozoic era, which are probably the most famous out of all: the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. And so we will spend some time kind of breaking this down because it is extraordinary. The Earth was really warm at that time, and that was hugely favorable to reptiles, and it allowed them to have the proper environment for food, water. I don't want to say shelter. It's not like they lived in homes, but it allowed for their ecosystem to be well suited for them to be super successful. And they were, and they grew big and fast and larger, and they're terrifying, some of the fossils, if you could only imagine seeing some of these. So we'll talk greatly about them. So with that being said, they were very dominant. Small mammals clearly were present during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. It's just that they were not very successful. I actually read an article where even whales and sharks were present in the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous. It's that they were actually flipped, is that whales were much smaller than sharks because they needed to be fast because sharks were their predator and the whale was prey. And then something happened and it caused them to flip, and now whales are clearly more dominantly larger than our sharks. But there were small animals there during this time period. We will talk about greatly the extinction of dinosaurs, the reptiles, and we call that the KT boundary. And that just stands for the Cretaceous and the Tertiary boundary, is where we can see just the reptiles were pretty much wiped out. Something happened where it caused just this major extinction between that Cretaceous and the Tertiary period. Ternary, sorry. And so there's lots of speculation. It is known that volcanic activity was very changed during that period of time. There is evidence of a very, very, very large meteor hitting the Earth in the Yucatan Peninsula down in Mexico, which caused pretty much a nuclear winter, caused so much gas and dust to be in the atmosphere, along with volcanic eruption, that it caused the Earth to cool down significantly. And the large reptiles, the dinosaurs, were not equipped for that. So that made way for our mammals in our Cenozoic era. So dramatic events, ice age, temperate zones and forests really started to take shape. And it kind of leaves us where we are today. We are in the Quaternary period right now. The Tertiary was much more of an ice age, and then we have our Quaternary. And so Quaternary, Eurasia and India continents collide to form the Himalayas, and world climate drops, enter the Ice Age, and then the Pliocene, where we can even find evidence of some animals. Here we can find woolly mammoths actually in Kentucky. So I like to think that epochs is a word that we haven't really talked about. So this is even a smaller breakdown of an era. And so we are right now like kind of just in like a break of an ice age. Like something could kick it right back in again, or it might get warmer, kind of just depending on where the ice sheets go with climate and the Earth's temperatures and everything that kind of go along with that. Whoops. So during this last epoch, our last kind of big climatic earth-changing events, we had our woolly mammoths, we had our sloths, we had our saber-toothed tigers. If you've ever seen Ice Age, this is it, the Pliocene. And so the Earth started to warm up and their environment went away. So we saw a major extinction there. So that was kind of just a brief view of our different three eras, our Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic. I'm going to go into much more detail and kind of talk about what are some of the major significant events that happened. Thanks for joining.